My name's Daniel. I'm 32 now, but this story starts back when I was barely 21 and still figuring out who I was. I grew up in a family where appearances were everything. My parents, especially my father, were obsessed with status, cars in the driveway, the right clothes, who we were seen talking to at church. The problem was, I didn't fit their mold. I wasn't the straight A, college-bound golden child like my older brother, Marcus. I didn't have the grace my mother always bragged my sister had. I was the quiet one, the kid who liked working with my hands and spent too much time sketching designs in a tattered notebook instead of rehearsing for the perfect life they had scripted for me. When I decided to skip college and start my own small carpentry business, they laughed. I remember my father leaning back in his leather chair, swirling the ice in his glass like he was delivering some profound truth, and saying, "You'll never be anything if you keep chasing these little hobbies. We're cutting you off. Maybe that'll wake you up." I didn't fight back. I just nodded, left the room, and that was the last real conversation we had for years. From that day on, I was on my own. No calls on my birthday, no invites to family dinners, nothing. When they did mention me to others, it was only to shake their heads and mutter about how I chose this life. My siblings followed their lead. Marcus once called me to ask for help moving some furniture, but when I said I couldn't because I had a client project, he muttered, "Figures. You're too busy pretending you have a real job." That stuck with me longer than I like to admit. Years went by, and I worked like my life depended on it, because it did. The business grew slowly at first, but my designs started gaining traction online. One job led to another, and eventually, I wasn't just making furniture. I was designing entire custom interiors for high-end clients. But none of that mattered to my family. They didn't see any of it. The first time I heard from them in over a decade was last spring. Out of the blue, I got a group text from my mother that read, "Family reunion this summer at Clearwater Shores Resort. Hope you can make it. If you can afford it, wink emoji." That little winking face nearly made me delete the message right there. It wasn't just an invite. It was a test, a jab wrapped in fake cheerfulness. I didn't respond. But as the weeks went on, I kept thinking about it. About how they'd all be there. Parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, the cousins who barely remembered I existed. I thought about the last time they saw me, broke and packing my old truck with everything I owned. I thought about the way they turned their backs without hesitation. And slowly, an idea began to take shape. I didn't RSVP. I didn't even acknowledge the invite. But I made sure my calendar was clear that weekend. The reunion was set for a Saturday afternoon, and I knew Clearwater Shores well. It was the crown jewel of the coast, a sprawling luxury resort where rooms went for more per night than I used to make in a month. What they didn't know was that, a few months earlier, I had closed a very private deal. Clearwater Shores had been struggling under its old management, and I'd stepped in as part of a small investment group to purchase and revitalize it. My name wasn't on the flashy press releases, but my signature was on the ownership documents. I arrived late on purpose. By the time I pulled into the lot, the sun was dipping low, casting everything in a golden glow. I could hear the faint sound of music and laughter coming from the beachfront terrace where they were gathered. My heart was pounding, not from nerves, but from anticipation. I spotted my mother first, dressed to the nines as always, holding court with a glass of wine in her hand. My father was beside her, nodding along to someone's story, his laugh loud and practiced. I walked up quietly, unnoticed, until the host of the reunion, a local event coordinator, took the microphone to make an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said with a bright smile, "before we continue with dinner, I'd like to take a moment to welcome someone very special to Clearwater Shores. Please join me in congratulating the new owner of this resort." She turned, gesturing right toward me. "Mr. Daniel Cole." And in that instant, every head turned. The moment the host said my name, the air seemed to change. A wave of confused murmurs rippled through the crowd, followed by stunned silence. My mother's smile froze mid-sip, her wine glass hovering just below her lips. My father's eyebrows twitched ever so slightly before settling into that carefully controlled, neutral expression he wore when he didn't want anyone to see he'd been blindsided. Marcus, on the other hand, looked me up and down as if trying to find something, anything, to mock. I gave a polite smile, thanked the host, and walked toward them at an unhurried pace. The only sound for a few seconds was the shuffle of chairs and the faint clink of cutlery. Then my Aunt Lydia, who never missed an opportunity to put me in my place, spoke first. Daniel? Owner? You must mean part owner, right? Someone like you couldn't possibly. She cut herself off, but her tone was enough to get a few quiet chuckles from my cousins. I didn't answer her. Instead, I let my eyes sweep over the crowd, making brief, calm eye contact with each of them. I noticed my father subtly turning toward Marcus, as though trying to silently align himself with his golden child before any conversation began. My sister, Rachel, gave a small, almost imperceptible roll of her eyes and leaned in to whisper something to her husband. He smirked. Finally, my mother stepped forward. Well, she said, her voice light and airy. This is quite a surprise. She touched my arm with her perfectly manicured hand, her grip just a little too tight. We didn't think you'd be able to make it. You've been busy, I suppose. The way she said busy dripped with condescension, as if I'd been running a lemonade stand instead of a multi-million-dollar operation. I kept my tone level. Yes, I've been busy. She tilted her head and gave a little laugh. That's good. Keeps you out of trouble, I hope. That got a few knowing looks from my uncles, the kind of smug glances that suggested they were remembering old family gossip about my reckless choices. The reunion dinner continued, but it was clear that my sudden reappearance had thrown them off balance. Every time I joined a group conversation, someone would find a way to slip in a backhanded comment. Marcus asked loudly, So, do you still live in what was it? That little apartment over a garage? Before chuckling to himself, Rachel chimed in with, Well, if you're running a resort now, I hope you have someone helping you with the numbers. We all know math wasn't your strong suit. And then came the real kicker, my father's toast. He stood up, glass in hand, and began praising Marcus for a recent promotion, then Rachel for her beautiful family and homemaking skills, before finally getting to me. And Daniel. He paused for a beat that was just a little too long. Well, Daniel seems to have landed on his feet. Let's hope it lasts this time. The table laughed softly, not maliciously loud, but just enough to sting. What they didn't know was that every jab, every smirk, every whisper was doing nothing but sharpening my focus. I didn't come here just to be seen. I came here to watch, to listen, to measure exactly how deep their contempt still ran. And before the night was over, they would give me more material than I could have imagined. By the time dessert rolled around, the tension had settled into a strange rhythm. Smiles for the group photos, polite laughter for the safe topics, and those quick, dagger-like comments slipped in whenever they thought I wouldn't notice. I played along, letting them believe they still had the upper hand. It wasn't until the second round of coffee was served that the evening took a turn. Marcus had disappeared for a while, and when he came back, he was carrying himself with that cocky swagger I knew all too well. He clinked his glass to get everyone's attention. So, he said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes, I just had a very interesting chat with the resort manager. I set my cup down. My gut told me whatever was coming wasn't going to be good. Marcus looked straight at me. You know, Dan, you should really tell people how you came into all this money. I mean, you didn't exactly build Clearwater Shores yourself, did you? He let that hang in the air, scanning the crowd for reactions. Some might say you just got lucky. Right place, right time. Maybe even took advantage of someone. A few people shifted in their seats. My mother's lips curled in a satisfied little smirk, like she'd been waiting for this. I didn't take the bait, but before I could even form a reply, my father chimed in. It's true, he said, his voice carrying that faux-wise tone he loved to use when he thought he was being objective. Opportunities like this don't just happen to people without connections. I just hope you're not mixed up in anything questionable. We wouldn't want the family name dragged through the mud. That word, family, burned hotter than the coffee in my hand. Rachel added her own flourish. Oh, come on. You know how it works, Dad. People with smaller businesses find a way to latch onto bigger ones. It's not exactly the same as earning it. I could feel the eyes of my extended family on me, weighing, judging. This wasn't curiosity. They were trying to rewrite my story right in front of me, strip me of the one thing I'd fought for, the fact that I'd done it on my own. Then Marcus leaned closer to my father and said, just loud enough for everyone to hear, maybe we should talk to our friends on the board here. See if they know the full story. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't just casual humiliation. They were trying to undermine me in front of the very people who now worked for me, to plant seeds of doubt about my integrity. If this little performance worked, It could ripple through the resort staff, the local community, even my business partners. The betrayal wasn't just in their words. It was in the fact that they were willing to risk my livelihood to protect the narrative they'd built about me years ago. The one where I was the failure. The one where they were right to cut me off. I sat there in silence, letting them think they'd scored their point, while something inside me hardened. Because if they wanted to test how much I'd really changed since the day they turned their backs on me, I was ready to show them. The rest of the evening felt like I was moving underwater. Conversations blurred together, every laugh from their side of the table landing like a slap. I stayed composed, but inside, my chest felt tight, my jaw aching from holding back every word I wanted to throw at them. After Marcus's little stunt, I noticed something subtle but undeniable. People in the room were looking at me differently. The resort's head chef, who had been friendly earlier, now seemed hesitant when she passed my table. One of the servers, who'd greeted me with a warm smile at the start of the night, avoided eye contact completely. The poison my family had dripped into the air was already working. I slipped away before the official end of the reunion, heading down the dimly lit path toward the private villas on the edge of the property. The sounds of the party faded, replaced by the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. The cool night breeze should have been calming, but it only made me feel more hollow. I sat alone on the villa's balcony, staring out at the moonlit water. My phone buzzed with a message from one of my business partners. Heard some chatter tonight. Everything okay? I typed back a simple, all good, then set the phone face down. The last thing I wanted was to explain myself, to admit that a few calculated whispers from my family were enough to make me feel like I was 21 again, broke, unwanted, and scrambling to prove my worth. That night, I barely slept. When I closed my eyes, I could still hear Marcus's smug voice, Rachel's condescending tone, my father's carefully aimed digs. I hated how easily they could still reach into me and twist the knife, even after all these years. The next morning, I considered skipping the second day of events altogether. My first instinct was to retreat, cut my losses, let them have their little victory. I even packed a bag and had it sitting by the door. But then I caught my reflection in the mirror. I didn't see the kid they thought they'd left behind anymore. I saw someone who'd built something they couldn't even begin to understand. That was when the shift happened. Not loud, not dramatic, but a quiet decision settling into my bones. I realized I didn't have to argue with them or defend myself. That wasn't how you dismantled a narrative this old. You didn't fight their lies head on. You made them irrelevant. And the way to do that? Let them talk all they wanted, while I set the stage for a truth so undeniable it would silence them without a single raised voice. I unzipped my bag, put everything back in its place, and started mapping out exactly how this would play out. The second day of the reunion dawned with the kind of golden light that made the whole resort look like it had been painted for a travel magazine. I stepped out onto my villa's balcony, the salty air filling my lungs, and for the first time since arriving, I didn't feel that tight knot in my chest. I had work to do, both for the resort and for myself. Before heading to the main events, I made a quiet call to the general manager. We'd been in touch often since the acquisition, but this was the first time I asked for something specific. Today, I said, I want the full tour given to our most important guests. Private, discreet. I'll meet you in the lobby in 20 minutes. From there, the day became a subtle but deliberate display of presence. The general manager walked me through the spa renovations I'd greenlit, the new oceanfront suites I'd personally helped design, the contracts with local suppliers I'd insisted on to boost the community's economy. Staff members stopped to greet me by name, discussing ongoing projects and future plans with the kind of familiarity that only came from real, consistent involvement, not some lucky windfall. At lunch, instead of hiding in the corner, I sat at the largest table, right in the middle of the terrace, where other resort investors happened to be gathered. We talked shop, deals, projections, things my family had no part in and couldn't casually dismiss. The conversation was effortless, and when I glanced toward the far end of the terrace, I saw Marcus watching from his table, a crease forming between his eyebrows. Throughout the day, I made time for small, strategic interactions. I spoke with the event coordinator about future bookings, discussed expansion ideas with the head chef, even joined a brief impromptu meeting with the marketing team. By the afternoon, word had spread among the guests and staff alike. This wasn't just a title. I was involved. I was respected. I was in control. And outside of the resort, my life had been on an upward climb for years. My design firm had doubled in size over the last 18 months. A new branch in another state was weeks away from opening. The clients I worked with now weren't just wealthy. They were influential, people whose opinions carried weight in industries my family could only dream of entering. I'd learned to invest smartly, surround myself with the right people, and keep my wins quiet until they were impossible to ignore. That night, I didn't avoid the reunion's evening gathering. I arrived exactly on time, walking in with a few of the resort's senior staff who'd been discussing a new project with me. As we entered, their conversation didn't pause. It carried on naturally, my name woven into it, making it impossible for anyone watching to pretend I was just a bystander. Marcus tried to catch my eye, but I didn't give him the satisfaction. Rachel's smile was thinner than the night before. My father, he didn't smile at all. It was working. They could feel it, control slipping from their hands. The narrative they'd held onto for over a decade quietly collapsing under the weight of reality. But I wasn't finished. This wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about setting the board for the move they'd never see coming. The morning of the final day, I woke earlier than usual, not because I had to, but because my mind was buzzing with the shape of what was coming. The resort was quiet at that hour. Only the faint hum of the early staff and the distant sound of waves breaking against the shore. I met the general manager in his office for a quick check-in. We reviewed guest feedback, upcoming bookings, and a few operational notes. That's when he mentioned something almost in passing. By the way, your father and brother approached me yesterday. They asked if there was a way they could get in on some of the resort's business partnerships. Sounded like they wanted to leverage your connection. I just sat back in my chair for a moment, letting that sink in. It was almost poetic. They'd spent years dismissing me, then actively tried to discredit me, and now, with the scent of money and influence in the air, they wanted to attach themselves to it. Did you tell them anything? I asked casually. The manager shook his head. I told them all inquiries go through ownership, meaning you. That single piece of information changed everything. Up until now, I'd been thinking in terms of proving a point. But this was leverage. They wanted access to something I controlled entirely. I didn't need to argue, defend, or even confront them directly. All I had to do was decide how and when to use that desire against them. Later that day, I walked the property again, but this time with a few local reporters who were doing a piece on the resort's revival. I didn't plan it for my family's benefit, but I knew they'd notice. And they did. From the corner of my eye, I caught Rachel standing with a group of cousins, watching intently as the photographers took shots of me with the staff, my name and title being clearly stated. That evening, the reunion wrapped up with a beachfront dinner, torches in the sand, string lights swaying overhead, the ocean just beyond our feet. The setting was beautiful, almost surreal, but beneath it all, the tension was palpable. My father avoided eye contact with me completely, Marcus kept his remarks to a minimum, and Rachel's attempts at small talk felt strained. They knew something had shifted, even if they couldn't name it. I sat through the meal, polite and composed, listening to their conversations without revealing the ace I was holding. Because the truth was, I didn't need to rush. I had all the time in the world, and they had no idea that the thing they now wanted most was something I had absolute control over. And when the moment came to finally pull the trigger, I planned to do it in a way that left no doubt about who had the real power now. The final morning of the reunion, the air was heavy with that odd mix of lingering celebration and the quiet packing up before everyone scattered back to their lives. For most of my family, that meant checking out after breakfast. For me, it meant finally setting the stage for the move I'd been building toward since the first night. I dressed simply, no flashy suits, no obvious signs of wealth, just a crisp shirt and slacks. I wanted my presence to feel deliberate, controlled. By the time I walked into the resort's private conference room, the general manager and two of my senior partners were already there, going over some documents. The timing was perfect. My father, Marcus, and Rachel happened to be in the lobby nearby, checking out. I asked the concierge, loud enough for them to hear, if she could let the Cole family know I'm ready for them in the conference room. She smiled, nodded, and within a minute, the three of them appeared in the doorway. My father's voice was cautious. You wanted to see us? I gestured toward the table. Yes, I heard you were interested in getting involved with the resort's partnerships. I kept my tone even, almost friendly. I thought we could discuss that before you left." They exchanged glances, clearly not expecting me to acknowledge their earlier request so directly. Marcus straightened up, trying to project confidence. "Well, we were just thinking it could be mutually beneficial. We know people who could bring in more guests, maybe secure some events. Of course, we'd expect some sort of stake." I nodded slowly, as if considering it. "A stake? That's interesting. You know, usually, when someone wants a stake in something, there's an expectation they've supported it from the start, believed in it, backed it. But in this case," I let my words trail off. "Well, that doesn't quite match our history, does it?" My father shifted uncomfortably. Rachel crossed her arms. Marcus tried to smile it off. "We've had our differences, but business is business, right?" I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table. "Exactly. And as the majority owner, my business decision is this. We don't work with partners who try to undermine our reputation, especially in front of staff and investors. I'm sure you understand." The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. Before they could respond, I added, "Of course, you're still welcome to stay here in the future, at full guest rates. But as for partnerships, that door's closed." My father's jaw tightened. Marcus's ears flushed red. Rachel opened her mouth, then shut it again. They weren't used to hearing no from me. They weren't used to me having the power to say it. I stood, signaling the meeting was over. "Enjoy the rest of your trip home," I said calmly, and walked out before they could recover enough to spin it into something else. What they didn't know was that by the time they reached the parking lot, I had already instructed the staff to ensure they received the most ordinary treatment possible. No special perks, no priority bookings, no family of the owner status. To them, it might have seemed petty. To me, it was a clear message. Whatever influence they thought they had over me was gone. And as I watched them drive away from the balcony above, I felt something I hadn't in years. Not just satisfaction, but peace. They left the resort without another word to me, their faces locked into tight, unreadable masks. But the silence didn't last long. Within a week, word got back to me through an old family friend that my father had been grumbling about how ungrateful I was, spinning the story to make it sound like he'd been doing me a favor. The problem for him was, the people he was talking to had already seen the local news article that ran the day after the reunion. A glowing feature on Clearwater Shore's new ownership, complete with photos of me standing beside the staff, quotes about my commitment to the community, and a clear outline of my role as the driving force behind the resort's revival. It didn't take long for their version of events to crumble. The same extended family who once nodded along to their "Daniel's a failure" narrative started calling me directly, congratulating me, asking about bookings, even apologizing for listening to the wrong people. Marcus's attempts to leverage his name for deals around town backfired when people realized his connection to me was non-existent in business terms. Rachel, who prided herself on her social circle, found herself on the outside of a few key gatherings because people had quietly decided they didn't want to be associated with someone who'd tried to smear her own brother in public. As for my parents, the next time they reached out was months later, through an email so formal it might as well have been typed by a lawyer, asking if we could put the past behind us. I didn't reply, not out of spite, but because I no longer needed anything from them. The power they once held over me had evaporated the moment they realized they couldn't rewrite who I was anymore. Life moved forward. The resort thrived. My design firm opened its second location. My circle grew tighter, filled with people who had seen me for who I was, not for who my family insisted I was. And the best part? I didn't have to burn a single bridge. I just left them standing on the other side, watching as the distance between us grew wider with every passing day. The last image I have of them is from that balcony, the morning they drove away from Clearwater Shores, 3 figures in the distance, smaller and smaller as they disappeared down the coast road. And for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't the one who'd been cut off all those years ago. They were.